All right. Well, as we said earlier, we are in this series called Got Questions, and we bring in the experts here because this is such an important topic for us to be equipped in regard to how we can talk about our faith, how we can understand our faith, and that it's not just based on nice ideas, right? It's based even in we're going to get to talk a lot about archaeology today. So very excited to have these two gentlemen here with us. If you were with us last week, you met Charlie, and Charlie's brother Tim is also with us today. So we're really glad to have both of you here, and so thankful for the gifts that God's given you to learn and to know and to communicate these realities with us. So I'm going to invite these two gentlemen up, and thank you very much for being here.
Well, I've known this guy for many years, and right here is the timeline of the Bible, starting at creation on that, and it comes up to the present on that side. And I really appreciate Tim. We've studied these kind of subjects for many years together, gone to conferences together, and so I'm kind of excited to have him go through this. A little different view than the way I did. Last week, it was kind of an overview of the New Testament. So it wasn't just one verse. There was, lots of verses with talking about lots of different people. Today, he's going to take several subjects and expand on those dealing with the Old Testament. Last week was the New Testament. This week will be the Old Testament. So take it away, Tim.
All right, I'll start where Michelle read in Genesis 11. And I'll go from Genesis 11 basically up to 0 BC when Christ was born. And the structure is going to be a detailed presentation on the Tower of Babel, showing how archaeologists dig stuff out of the dirt, what they find, what the layers mean, what their version of time, of geologic time is. And then I'll show the implications when you start taking the Bible verses apart and what you find in the dirt when you dig down. So that's going to be about half the presentation. And the other half of the presentation is 7 points picked out throughout from Babylon all the way to 0 BC of events that the Bible may say a casual comment. But when you look in the dirt, you find that the casual comment is based on something tangible. You can touch and feel and go to the Cairo Museum and see it, all right? So let's start. Let's see, I'm supposed to do this. Okay. That didn't do it. There it is. Okay, archaeology is not magic. There's only certain things it can do, and you're not going to find something like an ostracon or something, a piece of pottery that says, the world was flooded by, God, and me and my 3 sons survived. It's not going to happen. You're not going to find something that deterministic, that clear. But you can find something that's very compelling, relevant, and in all likelihood, if you took it to a court of law, they would say, well, yeah, of course, we know what that is. It's not proof solid, because that requires a person to have been there and seen it and take pictures and record stuff. But you can become very confident in what you're looking at. So, with all these details described in the Old Testament, there should be evidence in the dirt if we know where to look and when to look. And that's really important, because if you lost something on First Avenue, looking for it on 7th is not right. But if you lost it, and in archaeology, it's covered with dirt and there's layers. And if you look in the wrong layer, you will decide that Joshua did not fight the Battle of Jericho, and Jericho was already deserted when Joshua got there. It's because they're looking in the wrong layer. If, however, you go to the right layer in time, it's very blatant and obvious. So even secular archaeologists say the same thing, okay? So let's get started. Now, this was read, so I'm not going to repeat this part. Let me jump. But there's 6 things that are tangible that if you were looking for them, you'd expect to find these 6 things. So the first one is they found a plane in Shinar. So Shinar must exist someplace. Well, that's pretty trivial, because we have from other documentation lots of stuff that shows that Shinar exists. And it's, whoa, go back. It is simply Iraq. Kuwait is on the corner of it. It's the Gulf. It's the mouth of the Gulf. And it's well documented Back then, the Tigris and the Euphrates ran all the way into the Gulf, and there were two entrances. Today, today it's silted up. So, things do change over time. Now, let's look at this. So they claim that there was one language on the earth. Now that's tough to prove, right? Tough to get confident on. But look at this. And I need to explain the context of this letter. This is a 24-page letter carved on in mud, in hieroglyphics. It's written in Sumerian, so it's the most ancient language we know of. And what it is this king is Imriker, and the Lord of Aratta is a place. So he's writing a letter to the Lord of Aratta. And what the letter is about is he's down in the plains on the Tigris and Euphrates in the plain of Shinar. And he says, you need to send me all your gold and all your carved rock. Well, I need carved rocks to build a big temple to my god Enki. And that's important. And so he said, or I'm going to destroy you. That's the context of the letter. At the very beginning of the letter, he puts something in that's really interesting. And what it is, he says, my god Enki is so much more powerful than your god Ninana. There's 10 gods in the Mesopotamian pantheon, 3 big ones and 7 lesser ones. Well, Aratta had a female god who was a lesser god. And he said, Enki's the big dude. And because Enki did something, you should listen to my words in this letter and send me gold and stone, all right? So it's a secular letter, but he puts this in, and here's what he says. Where's the magic wand here? Hit the end, right? No, you don't. You do this. Is that it? Whoa, that didn't do it. Let's not point. Where is it? How's it?
I think you just, yeah.
It's on the end. Oh, the red button. There we go. Okay.
Watch right here, you'll be able to
See what my mistake is coming up. Yes. Okay, so let me read this. In those days, the mountain lands of Shubur and Hamas, this is a place near the Zagros Mountains today, mountain of noble functions, Akkad, that mountain land, resting in the meadows and mountains, all that kind of stuff. The people taken care of gave praise to Enlil, one of the 3 big gods, in one tongue. In those days, the contending lord, the contending prince, the contending king, Enki, the Lord of wisdom, the wise one of the country, the sage of the gods, he changed the language in their mouths, as many had been established, the language of each one of mankind being one. Now, he wrote this because he knew that these people understood that the world used to have one language. And in their legends, Enki was the one that saved mankind in the Great Flood. And he's the one that came down and he changed all the languages. So he said, this is the temple of Enki right here where I'm standing. And you guys need to send me gold and silver because Enki's the big guy. Don't mess with him. So that's the context. So here we have a historical document that is as old as we know, not long after the flood. And it's written in Sumerian, the first language. And he's saying that the world spoke one language. And that's a completely secular document. Now, let's go to another one. Everybody's heard of Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar, 700 years later, not 700 years later, in 500 BC, so this is about 1,500 years later, he references this tower. He said, the original tower had been built in antiquity. A former king built, they called it the Temple of 7 Lights of the Earth, but he did not complete its head. Since a remote time, people had abandoned it without order, expressing their words. Their words were not in order. They didn't make sense. So this is Nebuchadnezzar making a documentation. 1,500 years later, he's still remembering this. So let's look at what's happening in time there and see what we can get from this. This is conventional dating, which is kind of goofy. It starts big and it gets closer to now as we go here, okay? So we're moving down in time, coming closer to us. Now, what you find when you dig in the dirt in Mesopotamia, you find that there are no written languages before this point in time right here, this dotted line. And after that, there are suddenly all of the languages that we know in that area exist simultaneously with no morphology, no changing, nothing's happening there. But the languages suddenly appear, and they're radically different. Like Japanese is different from English, right? It just, poof, it happens. And this is secular guys, Germans, Italians, people that don't believe in God, atheists, dig in the dirt, and they come up with these answers. Now, if you look at this, we need to have, in Genesis 11, it talks about the people leaving Babel and going around the world. Okay, so when you look in the archaeological record, you find that in the same time period, there's only 2 times where people flooded out and they took their technology with them, a certain way of making clay pots and all this kind of stuff. Obviously, I'm shortening a 1-hour presentation, and I'm leaving out a lot of pictures, all right? So, but we can tell because these people went out and they left their stuff. They left their pots and things and the way of life and the style of houses. There are exactly 2 to choose from. We don't know which ones yet, but there's 2 things that happened. Now, in this same region, in Shinar, over time, there are 10 different cities known as Babel. Which one is the real one? Which is the one that we would say this is probably where the Tower of Babel was? So Nebuchadnezzar's Babylon, not it, because he was way later in time. Kulab, I can go through these, but it's not important there. The important thing is there's only one that's in the right location, in the right time, when there was a great gobble of people leaving it, okay? There's only one, and that's one called Eridu. In Eridu, there is the largest cultic temple complex of the ancient world, larger than anything that existed any time in the ancient world, I mean, up to the present, all right? There's 18 temples, each one buried and built on top of the next, built on top of the next, 18. And the top one is truly gigantic, just very big. So it's a big religious cultic center, and it was abandoned. It was abandoned in the late Uruk period, which is that second outgoing of people. It left. All the pots remained from that era, and there's no new pots. And here's the critical point. Something scared the daylights out of these people, because for 1,000 years, and we have clay bricks where kings from surrounding cities came to Eridu and repaired things. Repaired, not the city, I'll tell you in a minute what they were repairing. But they repaired stuff, and they stamped it. Even Nebuchadnezzar did that. He went there, he stamped it, he did stuff. For 1,000 years, people maintained this place, but there was nothing new. No new pottery, they didn't disturb anything, nobody lived there. They didn't eat there, they just came every while and they fixed it up and they left. They were afraid of this thing, and nobody in the secular world has any idea why, but they did it for 1,000 years. Now, here is an idea. If you go to Eridu, this outside line is the city wall, okay? The clay bricks, sun-fired clay bricks. The city wall exists, and right here is this huge, massive Colosseum-size cultic temple complex, that very big thing. But look beside it. Look beside it. That is the base of an unfinished tower that is larger than anything in the ancient world. Think of Khufu, the big pyramid on the Giza Plains. He and I were there 2 years ago. It doesn't even come close, because if you took the Great Pyramid of Khufu and you put it right on top of this, see, here's Enki's temple, the 18th temple, and here is the tower. The Great Temple of Khufu is about half the footprint. It's twice as big as that pyramid. And it's sitting in Eridu, all right? So, here is a picture. You want to see the Tower of Babel? There's the base of the Tower of Babel. Anybody can go there, if you don't mind being in Iraq and being shot at. So, this is And it is. This black stuff here on top, that is bitumen. It's tar. That's exactly what the Bible says they stuck the bricks together with, is tar, all right? So there are the 6 pieces of evidence that were dug out of the ground, and it really is compelling. It is compelling. And yet, almost nobody. Now, I've given this presentation in some churches in Africa and in Europe, and to missionaries that have been there for 20, 25 years, and they just kind of sit there with a jaw open saying, we didn't know the Bible had that much evidence. And you guys are getting just a little piece. This presentation is 3 times as long with lots of details in it. But this is the bottom line. Yeah, what the Bible says actually happened in the order it said. So let's try. Now, the rest of these are short, and I have a biblical passage, and I'll give you some context on the passage, and then I'll give evidence about that passage. And these aren't massive big things like the Tower of Babel, but they're proofs. And I've scattered them out across this chart from the Tower of Babel as the nations come out, going across to this point here. So these are all in the Old Testament. So here's the first one. Here's the first one. There it is. Is that the first one? Yes, it is the first one. Okay. All right. Genesis 33. Now Jacob loved Joseph more than any of his other sons. Bad idea. And he made him a richly ornamented garment. All right. Now, everybody in the world didn't make richly ornamented garments, but this is in the 12th dynasty, the Egyptian dynasty in the Old Kingdom, Senusret II. This is in his mastaba, which is a mastaba looks like a shoebox. It's big enough. It's like a one-room house made out of stone. They put the body in there. It's the precursor to pyramids, all right? So this is a long time ago. And the multicolored tunics match what Joseph is wearing. This is the kind of thing. These are Semites, meaning people from the Levant. The idea of from Israel and Lebanon that area is called the Levant, right? Both of those things together. And the second one is he's the vizier underneath the Pharaoh. So at the same time, they're showing these Semites coming to Egypt for barter and trade and stuff, and that's the kind of clothes they wore, was what Joseph was wearing, was given. So it's relevant to the right time period. These Semitics, these people that became Hebrews, were doing the things that the Bible said in that old time period. Now, you could look at it another way, and that is during this old time right here, the name Jacob or Jacob only existed from 1600 BC to 1800 BC. In all the records, all the pottery shards they dug up, and all the scarabs, the little things they carve in Egypt, the name's never used, except during this 200-year window, it's put in right there. And that's what he was. That is the time period, and it's consistent with what the Bible says. This is it's a thing you put on a ring. It looks like it's a beetle upside down, and the bottom's flat, and they stamped wax seals with these rings. So that is a name. That is the name Jacob, written in Egyptian. Okay, so the next one is the flood in Exodus 6. Now, this is really interesting. We know what these 10 plagues are. We can read them in the Bible. Moses said, "Let my people go." The Pharaoh said no, and God stomped on them 10 times. But look what a sage, a writer, a scribe wrote about the 18th dynasty, about this time when they left Egypt. He wrote this. Now remember, Pharaohs always, they never wrote things bad about themselves. They went out to a big battle, like the big battle in Kadesh in the middle of what is now Israel. The Hittites came down, the Egyptians came down, and they fought to a standstill. And neither one won, and they left. And we have both the monuments, both said, "Man, we just kicked the tar out of them. We won, yes." Egyptians were very reluctant to say anything ever bad because Pharaoh was God. But look what this guy writes. Water turning to blood everywhere. This is a secular document. Plagues, pestilence, the grain was destroyed, physical disfigurements, prevalence of death, mourning throughout the land, rebellion against Ra, the sun god. That was the chief guy. Authority of the Pharaoh being lost. Pharaoh was Ra's embassy before the people. He was the living embodiment of Ra. Egypt losing a battle. To admit that, I don't know of anything else in Egyptian history where they actually state they lose a battle. Jewelry now in the possession of slaves, the death of children. There's another source. There's a second author that wrote similar stuff about this event as well. So there's two sources for that. So now here's something about Joseph. And it says that Pharaoh took off his signet ring and clothed him in fine linen and put the gold necklace around his neck. Just that little phrase, I've skipped over it all my life, but it's not a small thing. There is something called the Gold of Valor, and it's an ancient Egyptian award that you had to be a general or somebody really important that has greatly aided the Pharaoh to look good before the god Ra, okay? And the Pharaoh would come, and he would put this gold of valor around your neck, and you could wear this in public, and it weighed about a half a pound of gold. So it was a big deal. Well, there it is. Now, 50 years ago, we did not know about that. We didn't, but we found them, and we found pictures. Here's a picture of one, a necklace this is a piece of a bigger picture where this is being given to this person, okay? So, again, consistent with ancient Egypt. Now, look at this. This is a photo I and Charlie took 2 years ago at the Saqqara necropolis. This is on the plains outside of Giza, Egypt. And you can see the big three pyramids from this graveyard. This necropolis is a place where we put dead people. And they have straw in the bricks. Just, you can see them. And it's all over Egypt. It's really common. So that's the way they made bricks back in that time period. It's, again, consistent. All right. Menephre was a pharaoh, and he came up. Some people think that the Exodus occurred in 1250 BC. Wrong. It happened, according to biblical chronology, in 1446 BC. And it's a whole different group of pharaohs when you go back that far. Now, here in 1219, Menephre was, he went in and he raided the Levant. He attacked them, and he killed a bunch of people, took over a bunch of cities, and then left. And he wrote this on a stone. We've seen this in the Cairo Museum. And he says, Israel has been laid waste and its grain is not. So in 1219, remember I said 1250, some people think the Exodus was in 1250. Well, Israel was already a nation when Menephre went up there. He mentions a bunch of cities, kingdoms, I'll call them kingdoms, groups of people with their own cities, and he stomps on them and destroys them. And he says, and Israel was destroyed too. Their grain is gone. It's gone. So by 1219, Israel was already big enough for a pharaoh to note. They weren't just the little tribal guys with their tents out in the foothills. So it's an evidence that they existed already in 1200. The House of David stone. This is marvelous because up until about 50 years ago, even 20 years ago in some cases, there was no record of David in the archaeological record. Nobody has found anything referring to King David. But now we have found several things that refer to King David. Here is one of them. I had to pick one. And we were at the place where this was found just, 3 weeks ago? In Israel, yeah. But it mentions this battle in Dan, the area of Dan, up in northern Israel. King Jehoram of Israel and Ahaziah of Judah, and then it says, of the house of David. All right? So now we have a hard reference to the house of David. And there's several things like that. There's several things like that we now have regarding the house of David, which is neat. Okay, the last one is interesting. I need to give a little background on this. Girls wear little amulets on their wrist and things like this. Some of the Jewish customs have people putting things on their forehead, and when we were in Jerusalem, we saw people wearing phylactery, the 613 laws in the book of Moses and in the Torah. They wear it on their head. We saw people like that. And then they also have things on their leg, on the side that they'll wear if they're really serious about God and stuff, about tradition. But one of the things that they do is they'll wear parts of the Torah. Now, one of the parts of the Torah is the high priestly prayer that is given by Moses in Numbers 6:24. And everybody's heard this. The Lord bless you, the Lord, and keep you. This is in movies even. The Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord turn his face to you and give you peace. So we're about 600 BC. In another 100 years, the Babylonians are going to come in, and the Assyrians, and wipe everything out. So this is around, this is 100 years before that, right? That we're figuring this, that this was made. Now what this is, it's a scroll of silver that's been rolled up and hooked on a string, and people would wear it around their neck or around their wrist. Now, they found it back in, don't I have the date there? 79? Yeah, how come I can't see that up there? Oh, there we go, found 1979. And they were way too afraid to open it up because it was so brittle. And as time went past, in the 90s, they finally took a CAT scanner, and they did a CAT scan, like looking for a tumor in your brain. They did a CAT scan, and they got the words off of it without breaking it open. Once they got the words off it, they unrolled it, and that's what it looks like on the right, the brown thing, all right? And look what it says. The first line is damaged, too damaged to get much out of, but then it says, may Yahweh bless you, keep you. May Yahweh make his face shine upon you and grant you peace. So right out of the book of Moses, but it's got to be somewhere between 600 and somewhere 600 BC, all right? I mean, you can't get past 597 because then they're gone. Everything's destroyed. So it was written before that. So here's another tangible thing that people used to wear, and we found one. When Charlie and I were digging in Shiloh at the archaeological site 4 years ago, the guys found, a different team in a different area of the city of Shiloh, found a ceramic pomegranate. Now, the Ark of the Covenant was at Shiloh for 369 years. It spent most of its time there, not in Jerusalem. So when you read the Torah, you find that the instructions that Moses wrote to the priest were to make pomegranates and tie them on the bottom of your robe. Right, tie them on the bottom of your robe. So we actually we were on a team that found a pomegranate, honest to goodness pomegranate, at that site. So it can go on and on and on, but I think that's the message I have for you today. From the Tower of Babel to little scraps of silver coming out of the ground, and there's gobs and gobs and gobs more that I'll come back or something. So, do you have any questions?
What year was the line you originally mentioned? Writing?
Oh, the writing came up?
What year was that line?
In secular, the secular ages don't correspond to biblical timelines, but the names of the layers are all consistent, okay? And what it's called is the Uruk phase 2, okay? The Uruk layer, and the first outpouring of people was the Ubaid period. The second one was the Uruk period. And the one that follows after that has all the languages in it, is called the Jemdet Nasr period, okay? So right there, you go from nothing to everything. And that's when that second just outpouring of people from the Sumerian area is yeah. So it's in the Jimdat Nasa period is when it all appears. And the reason I'm not giving you a date is because it doesn't make sense. I mean, it's before the flood. You know, they go back before the world was made. So, yeah. Any other questions?
Could you just briefly talk about the name Yahweh?
Yahweh.
Maybe aren't familiar because the blessing there.
Hebrew is a Semitic language, and that means they only write vowels, okay? They only write vowels. So we don't have consonants. So those 4 letters stand for God's name. Now, is it Y-A, Y-E, Y-O? We don't know. They didn't write it down. Their language at this time did not include vowels or diacritical marks, which like the dots. You put dots above this consonant, that means it's followed by the vowel O or something like that. So later, when they were writing Hebrew, they did. But back then, so we don't know how those 4 consonants, you can't pronounce consonants. When you say Yahweh, we're putting in an A. But it could be Yahweh. It could be, I mean, that's the way Semitic languages are, okay? So, Right. That was the letters. Let me say one more thing about Semitic languages. Semitic languages consist of 3 consonant sequences, okay? And and they're all related. If you have, I'll give you an example in one of my presentations, KTB, okay? KTB means it has something to do with writing. If you add a vowel in there, it's like to write. If you add a different vowel, it means a letter. If you write another one, it's a pad of paper. So when you see a word that has KTB in it, those consonants, this is something about writing. Now, when you see Yahweh, what you see is a better translation of that into our language would be the one who is Yahweh, the one who is, yeah. So it's hard to go from one language to another without going through the culture. What are they meaning? Yeah, so, say, God. Well, we're all dependent on God. Is the only one that is always is, So anyway, there's something. I think that's all. Thank you.